Here.
Mackey?
Here.
Newton?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from December 14th, 2021.
Move, Madam Chair.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Mackey?
Yes.
Livingston?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next up is adoption of the agenda. Just to confirm, staff, any changes, any additions? Thank you. All right.
That's it, Madam Chair. Move for adoption.
Second.
Livingston?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Newton? Yes. Motion approved.
Next is election of chair.
Mr. Mackey to remain as chair.
Second. Thank you.
Livingston?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues for your confidence again to serve as chair for our Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee. The next item on our agenda and the main item for discussion for this committee meeting today is our Strategic Planning Workshop Report. More specifically, the goals that are in this report. Just to remind folks, this strategic plan report has been a document that we've worked on for several months. We held our initial strategic planning retreat in November of last year, where we all came together and said and thought about these goals that we wanted to make, and really gave our consultant our thoughts so they were able to come up with this first draft of a document. Then we met again in January at our annual retreat to really then do a deeper dive and to start talking about goals that we all wanted to see. And so overall, I'm pleased with the draft that we have. It is one that we have continued to work on and refine. And at this point, I want to spend this meeting going through goals that are presented in the document. Staff has worked together along with the consultant to outline goals that are a reflection of what they have heard from council at these different retreats, and then as well as initiatives and timeframes for the proposed initiatives to kind of match the goals. Starting on page 22 is where I would like our discussion to begin, just for reference point. But before we get started, I do want to give our staff as well as consultant opportunity to kind of give any overview or set the stage of any information they want to share about how we got to developing this table before we begin discussing. So Lori, I'm not sure who you would like to speak first.
Madam Chair, if it pleases you, then we'll go ahead and turn this over to Melanie Varghese from Baker Tilly and let her sort of explain how we've gotten to this point.
Thank you so much. Melanie, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, council members, and thank you, Chair Mackey, for that overview. As you mentioned, just to recap how we have gotten to this point in our strategic plan, we did begin our strategic planning process several months ago in September, and as Chair Mackey noted, we held our first workshop with council members in November of 2021. The outputs from that first workshop and goals statement further held an additional workshop in January of 2022, where we solicited input from different departments going into that workshop to understand any initiatives that needed to be captured to further define the goals. So from that workshop, our team worked in collaboration with the council members and department staff to determine the finalized list that is in front of you, beginning on page 22. And so you'll see each of the goals noted, as well as the initiatives that have been determined that support each of those goals. You'll also notice that we have further defined a proposed owner in order to make sure accountability is accounted for within the strategic plan. And we have put in a proposed timeline and sample metrics that can be considered to ensure that the plan is implemented. So at this point, we would love for council members to provide, their feedback in terms of what the priorities are in terms of initiatives and any additional feedback, but we want to make sure that the priority initiatives are emphasized within the strategic plan and emphasize next year. So with that, I will pause, and if there's any questions or feedback, I certainly welcome that.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Is staff, Ms. Thomas, is there anything else before we kind of begin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the record with the goals, you will notice that goal number 1 is relatively broad with fostering good governance, and much of what is in the first couple of objectives there, you will notice they are sort of guided by the rest of the program or the rest of the goals because we're going to have to complete that before we can actually come up with timetables and things of that nature. So beyond that, it gets more into the meat of the goals as you get into goals 2 through 6. These are items that the departments felt were important. Some we will find will be recurring, but it will memorialize it more than anything to actually ensure that processes that we should be doing are actually continued moving forward, but it just sort of memorializes it as a beginning to a process to make sure that we address things. But we want any questions, comments, or concerns from council, and certainly would like to know if there are any that are more of a priority to this body than to others. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So to work through this, I know we have an hour, and I don't expect us to get through all the goals, but we may, depending on how this committee is feeling this evening. I would like to kind of take each of them and get a consensus of if you feel there is anything missing that staff you would like staff to go back and add, or if you feel as if maybe the timeline is off or you have questions about anything. So I do want to walk through them one by one, just to make sure we're all on the same page and understood the recommendations that are in front of us. Want to pause. Any concerns about that approach?
No concerns, just following up on a conversation that you and I had earlier, and to the point that you just made, the idea is that we're taking part of the goals now and then we'll take part of the goals later.
That is my approach.
Unless we are blazing.
Yes, unless we can get all 7 goals tonight or this evening in the hour that we have. I don't want to rush, and I want to make sure that we have adequate time to review.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so as ACA Thomas mentioned, goal 1 is all about fostering good governance, which is something that we've heard several council members talk about, that we agree is a true initiative that we want to take on, a priority. And so each of the objectives under this really talk about creating more of a framework for good governance, creating a strategic plan, holding ourselves accountable, and making sure that we are following up on all the initiatives we set before us. So objective 1, develop realistic and achievable goals. And there's initiatives by those, and the proposed owners are county staff, department directors, and county administrators. Looking at a timeline of 6 to 12 months and coming up with a year-end strategic goals review. So ultimately, at the end of this, we want to be able to look back and say, okay, we have identified realistic goals for all the tasks that we set for ourselves, or initiatives that we set. We want to be able, at the end of the year, to look back and check those off and be able to show that we've actually completed things. And this goal is what's setting us up to do that. So we're all on the same page at the beginning. Any thoughts about this goal? Is there any thoughts of it's missing anything? Objective 1.2, create a shared vision with agreement by county leadership. One of the key initiatives under this one is conduct an annual, biannual meetings between county employees to share ideas and calibrate shared mission. I do have a question about this one, and I'm just going to open it up, whatever staff member can answer. When we talk about having these meetings between county employees, was there a recommended framework of what these meetings would look like? And, is this just kind of surveys? Is it a small group, large group? What is it that we envision these to look like?
Madam Chair, if it pleases, I'll respond. In my past experience, what we have seen with this is once this document would be approved by the body, previously we would have offered small groups to actually, through departments to actually vet these. Of course, I was with a smaller agency. It may be to look at multiple venues. We might look at Zoom as a platform virtually. We might look at some departments who may want to actually host us in their departments for events. But the ultimate goal there would be that we would actually talk with each department and each employee concerned to make certain that they're aware that we do have these overarching goals and what the vision and mission of the council is.
Ms. Mackey, if I may elaborate on that. So ideally, something like this would fall in alignment with something that I started doing when I first got here before we ran into some of the pandemic, where I would go around to each department. I spoke with both, we had administration, we had supervisors, and then we had the folks that were not at supervisor level. And the idea was that the communication was made that we're all in this together, so that from the top to bottom to top, that it's a unified approach. That the way I'm successful is because each of you are successful, and here's what that looks like. Similar to what we were doing somewhat with the HR impact survey that we were doing, but we could not go to department, but we did the meetings in here and we did them virtually, and I tried to attend as many of those as I could to speak to, again, what we were trying to accomplish, why we're seeking your input, and that your input really is what's going to drive how we make our decision. So I would see this being a reflection of that type of process. And until we learn from our staff that they don't think that input process is the best way to do it, then we will modify accordingly, because that's what we're seeking, is that unified communication that allows us to take whatever input and whatever steps we're trying to accomplish and marry those two things together. So that would be how I would see that as well, similar to what Lori was talking about.
Mr. Livingston?
It's a general question about the timeline matrix category. I mean, it's more of a time frame than a timeline. You said from 6 to 12 months, for example, for objective 1.1. Are we going to look at that in terms of, progression? Like, what have we accomplished the first 6 months? At some time frame to look back instead of saying, let's get to 12 months and it's all done. So it'll be helpful to try to set some time, do a timeline somewhere in there so we can kind of follow up on where we are before we get there.
I think that makes sense, Mr. Livingston. I think this is, as we talked about before, a living process. And so that's kind of what we would look to do, is to adapt to what makes sense for Richland County. So I certainly could see how you would want something like that from a progression standpoint. And there's no issue with us doing that.
Thank you. Ms. Newton?
Madam Chair. Brown, I guess I just share this more for input because I don't want to dictate a process, and I think that bureaucracy can kill things faster than anything. But I guess for me, when I look at objective 1.2, some of it is understanding a vision, but part of it is also culture change. Generally speaking, getting people to embrace what you're doing. And when I've worked in other organizations, I worked in an organization where anybody at any time in the elevator might ask you what you had done today to achieve the company's mission. And far from being as aggressive as I made it sound, it was kind of in jest, but it was because that was a philosophy that everyone had embodied. Sometimes organizations have culture teams where they're looking at things. I guess I just want to say from my perspective that long term, I'd like to see us move from, and I understand what we're saying we're doing, to I embrace this and I understand how this fits in with my role. So to cite, for example, one of the stories that everybody knows on earth, if you look at a place like Nordstrom and how they live their values, they understand what their mission is in terms of customer service. Every individual understands this is the amount of authority that I have to resolve an employee's problem because this is a stated goal of the organization. And it ends up, moving from understanding to embracing to empowerment. And this is just a starting point, but that's where I would like to see us go. Thank you.
A follow-up, I guess, Mr. Brown, to kind of what you were saying about the meetings. Would it be the intent or goal, I guess, is as you have these meetings that a report or some overall synopsis is developed and then would be brought back to the committee or to council, just so that we're also aware of the feedback that you've heard, or if you do receive feedback?
So the answer to the question is yes, and really the way I see that is, to Ms. Newton's point, it would not necessarily just be a meeting with the administrator. One of the things that I've heard, and I think will be helpful, and some of you have been able to do this, is sometimes it really is the county, and it's not the county administrator and then the county council, right? And then the staff. And to the culture point, that's the idea, is that some of these things, it would be inclusive. But yes, ma'am, there would be some documented communication that reflects what we've done. But again, I do not necessarily see it as a separation, to the point that Ms. Newton mentioned about culture. And so I certainly have some thoughts on that as broad. But yes, ma'am, there would be. All this is about providing documentation that we could then go back and build from to improve upon what we're doing.
I would like to see, at least for, when we look at 1.2, some type of report back to say that, yes, that these departments did have these meetings. There were something that shows us that we've actually, done it. These are the things that we talked about, and somehow to be able to look back and see if we notice any difference, if we're getting feedback, and being able to document it.
All right, last thing on this. What we're talking about is an approach that includes departments, it includes larger groups coming together. I guess I just wanted to say also that as part of this process, I think it would be great if, to the extent that we don't already have it, we have some sort of feedback mechanism where our employees, feel comfortable, whether it is attributed or anonymous, to share suggestions and feedback. So, I don't have to wait. It's January 7th. I don't have to wait until our meeting on June 10th or my departmental meeting, whenever that is, that there's just a way. I feel like that was one of the things I heard at the retreat, just a desire to really increase staff's ability to communicate thoughts, desires, concerns, ideas. So just to make sure that we're facilitating that, because sometimes a meeting where everybody's coming together and your boss and your boss's boss is not always the most enticing way for people to say what they feel.
Thank you. Any eyes on 1.2? Okay. Moving to 1.3. Establish metrics for accountability in implementing the strategic plan, with the initiatives of establish schedules to review goals and assign accountable staff members, routinely collect documentation among departments to measure strategic plan objectives, progress, and use to generate county wins. So looking at this one, and I'm going to kind of speak of my understanding and takeaway, but I definitely want committee members or staff to chime in if you were reading this or taking it differently. But looking at this, I'm reading this is that we as council need to give feedback on how departments or staff should be tracking goals and accountability. And I think it's key that we do need to have some type of tracking mechanism that county council has, but also that we can share with the public so that they can see the results of the strategic plan, the initiatives that we set forth. I would like for us to, at the minimum, be able to do this on a quarterly basis. I understand that everything may not be complete, in a 3-4 month period, but to know if we've begun a task, started a task, or if we are in the process of progressing, or if there is some problem that has come along the way and we need to reevaluate that said initiative. I think addressing that on a quarterly basis will help us to stay on track instead of waiting past that time frame. But open to other ideas or thoughts, or if staff view this goal in a different way, I would love to hear thoughts. Ms. Barron?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope that this is connecting to this objective. As we are tracking and being accountable, I think it would be helpful also if those items or those projects that we're working on, that it's specifically identified in there as well. So if there's a project that we're working on that's directly correlated to this particular goal or objective, or any of them for that much, that we should be specific in, okay, we're working on project A and it's directly connected to goal 1, objective 1-3.
Thank you. Ms. Newton?
Thank you. I think that one of the things that I would eventually like to see, when it makes sense, is at least a discussion of if we're going to be incorporating these tasks and items all into performance review. Sorry, to repeat for the microphone, that we look at how we might incorporate some of these objectives and actions into our plans for performance reviews. We're talking about accountability. There are reports at a general high level, but if we're saying, hey, XYZ team is going to be managing this thing that's important for us to achieve our goals, I think that measuring that in terms of reviews is helpful because it tracks progress. And it's also a mechanism to reward performance towards those goals. Again, this is a process that has a slow ramp up, so I don't think that it happens necessarily immediately, but long term, I think that should be considered.
Thank you. And it's a question today for the timeline of 0 to 6 months. Is the 0 to 6 months assuming that it will take us 6 months to identify a template that works for all departments? Thank you. Objective 1.4, reevaluate strategic plan and adjust as needed. So develop a reevaluation process for the strategic plan with tracking documents and processes, including status checks, informal review process of the strategic plan for where adjustments can be made. I look at this one as somewhat that was included in 1.3 that we just went over. But I do think when we started this process, we talked about the strategic plan, making sure it wasn't a document that we created and kind of set on the shelf for, many years. And, my goal would be that this is a document that come, in 3 years that we're looking at, okay, it's time to update overall and develop a new one, and that we've been able to accomplish many of the things that we set forth, and we need to reevaluate where we are as a whole and develop a new plan. And I don't necessarily see that in here spelled out, but that was my thought process. But I'm open to any of the thoughts my council members have regarding time frame and reevaluation of the strategic plan. Ms. Livingston, say it again, the mic for me, please.
You're talking about once you complete the plan and then the next step to evaluating the plan, I don't know, maybe a year, 6 months?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Mackey. That's what I was going to say. So the way we're looking at this is because in our mind, we're hoping to have this be a part of how we operate. So that would be a part of our budgeting process, which is right now, at least an annual process. So looking at the strategic plan, making sure we're going in the direction, to your point earlier, that many of you mentioned about, I think Mr. Livingston mentioned that some measurable process along the way. Are we following that same direction? So that if we need to go back and reevaluate in the interim before we get to the end of 3 years and realize we deviated from what we thought we were doing, we would have a way to track that on a more consistent basis at a minimum of a year, whether that's the calendar year or the fiscal year, would be my hope. And if we were not doing it as an organization wise, we would certainly still be doing it internally as administration, because that's my way of coming to you and talking about trying to remind us what we sat down and discussed about what we were trying to accomplish. So everything else you said toward the end about restarting it, I would agree with that in addition to those statements.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wait.
Okay, sorry. So you mentioned time frame and budget. So at this point, we have already started our kind of budget process for 22-23. So moving forward, the goal would be that we're evaluating this ahead of this budget process for 23-24. Is that correct? Am I saying those years right?
So yes, ma'am. We're going into 23. So you're talking about 24. So we want to continue to make sure those larger goals that you set still reflect the direction that you're moving in. Because when you set those larger goals, to me, those larger goals weren't next year, here are our top goals. It was, here's what we're doing as the current sitting council to reflect how we want to change this organization. Here's what we see. And then what we're doing right now is we're breaking down how we get to those larger things. So some of the things you will see reflected in this year's budget, which you will give us feedback on, but we will continue on that track and get better and more defined as we go through this process, as we get better each year in refining our strategic process. So that's my understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and the start that we've made to begin to accomplish those things.
Okay. So if we were looking at a timeline, though, would we say annually we would look at this in Q1? Is that true? Or is it, when you say we're going to reevaluate it annually, what is your time frame of it? What does that look like?
So Q1 for us, though, would be July or September. So you could say Q1, but it's Q1 of the fiscal year and not the calendar year.
Is that the best time frame you would recommend for staff's planning?
So for example, what we would be doing starting this budget year, going into the council retreat, which is in the January timeframe, you would have already made some decisions about what you're doing now, but living out for the next few months before you start going into your actual retreat. So what I would be saying is, remember, because I'm putting all this together, if we're doing quarterly reviews of information, then it won't be brand new. So staff would be still receiving some feedback from you on where we're trending. And then when you get to that retreat, in my mind, again, now we're more in the refining process based off what we've been doing. So there's some movement we can do there, but that's how I see it now that we're rolling. So, right, it'll be kind of like a rolling calendar, if you will. So sorry, that's not clear in me speaking it out, but in my mind, I'm playing out planning activity implementation. So that's kind of how it's playing out in my mind.
Ms. Newton?
This is probably going back 2 points, but as we're talking about the measurements, et cetera, I just want to point out that we probably won't get there today, but on page 35, we do have also objective 6.6 about creating reporting dashboards. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that was also captured in this process.
All right, moving on to 1.5, collaborate with other governments. Establish best practices using peer-to-peer neighbors like entities and related professional associations to measure achievement of best practices via workshops, fairs, or other constructive events, and to build relationships with nonprofit, governmental organizations, municipalities, state and federal organizations across all departments to determine points of parity. The accountability is mainly Richland County Economic Development Office, Utilities Director, Government Community Services Division Manager, and all department directors. If we could, can staff give a little more background as to this and kind of thoughts?
So certainly I can give you some feedback from my perspective. But one of the things that we've heard the council mention and that we've tried to do was work with partners who have similar work, who maybe have what we believe similar community engagement that would impact each other, and work with jurisdictions who we feel like reflect what we've heard your vision for this county looks like, and our internal desire as well to be recognized as a high-performing government. Utilizing our relationships to help us take advantage of things that they have already done that we want to do, but then also working with them to accomplish things that we cannot necessarily do on our own or do as well if we would not partner with someone who may have a similar connection to the community. So for us, it's actually learning what that looks like and then beginning to try to take what we learn and put it into practice. So for one example would be in looking at ARP dollars. I looked at some communities who are working together with other agencies within their locale to affect an item of concern that was addressed by the community, that agency, as well as a desire to affect, to meet ARP's eligibility requirements. So instead of that county taking on the ownership by itself, it partnered with other agencies who had a similar concern, but who were able to actually do it where the county couldn't really take it on, but they could provide, in this instance, some funding support. So that would be one of the examples that I would think of when we're talking about collaborating and working together. But I'll stop there.
Mr. Livingston?
It's also important too on 1.5 in the category accountability and ownership. I don't see the county council listed there, but I think the county council will play a major role there. If we're going to foster good government, we can learn about the role of other councils, some of their ordinances, how they work and so forth. So I think council can play a big role there and it ought to be included of accountability and ownership.
Thank you. Ms. Newton?
Thank you. Along the lines of Mr. Livingston, I thought I heard when we talked about this that it wasn't just staff level collaboration, that it was also governmental collaboration among electeds. And so to that point, I feel that I guess, a third bullet, carrot, whatever we want to call it, would be creating opportunities or whatever we want to call it for county council to build and deepen relationships with other governments, municipalities, et cetera. I think we have the same relationships, and we haven't been able to do it because of COVID, but that's one of the reasons that we used to have, for example, our legislative night, et cetera, so that we also build those relationships.
Thank you. For this one, we look at metrics and we say increase the number of scheduled events or increase the number of established relationships. Has staff kind of identified what that starting point is? So when we say increase, have we identified what our starting point is, where we are now, to say what we want that increase to be? And are you looking for county council to establish some type of goal, whether it be a percentage or what increase is, right? Because if you just go one above, is that really satisfactory?
Madam Chair, if I may, really what the outcome here would be, or what we would hope for here, is that once we have this document and have council's approval, if you will, we would then be able to go back and determine with the departments what the actual metrics should be, and that would be one of the first things that you would see in some of your reporting documents, is the things that the departments and or other groups would be hoping to achieve.
Thank you.
And I think more specifically, Ms. Mackey, some of these things are us getting started. So there's a baseline that really needs to be established. And we can make a determination either as a group together as to whether or not this year is the baseline. So that then we go from there. So I would just like to say at some point in time, some of these things we need to establish a baseline, and then we know what the next expectations would look like and if that was enough. So thank you.
Okay, so that is all of our objectives for goal 1. Based off what we've gone through in our objectives and the previous retreat, I would like to hear from my colleagues. Is there anything you think we're missing in goal 1, or do we feel this kind of covers us for the intent of this goal? Mr. Livingston, Ms. Newton?
I feel good. I just think, to the points that you've already made previously, we're going to have to go back and review timelines, timeframes, et cetera.
Thank you. All right, goal number 2 is economic development. 2.1, create high-paying jobs from planning growth and strategic economic development projects. Initiatives: organize a workforce symposium for workforce entities supported by the county, involving a select group of the 10 to 20 of the most effective workforce organizations. Evaluate the feasibility of a culinary school at Columbia Mall to implement a 2-year degree program benefiting workforce entry for unemployed and underemployed residents. And then implement and execute economic development strategic plan. Mainly Richland County Economic Development Office, county administrator and departments, and looking at a metrics of number of jobs and investment dollars. Open up to my colleagues. Any thoughts on objective 2.1 and the initiatives tied to it? Good.
I feel like we need more people on the. So from my perspective, a few things. One is I support the goal. And from my perspective, I certainly want to see us creating high-paying jobs. I guess I feel like, to me, it feels like it leaves out just the general economic investment in our area in general. And so maybe I'm missing that, maybe I'm not, but I think that those go together, but are worth mentioning separately. Sometimes you may have large investments that may not create new jobs per se, but they create new opportunities, or they might create jobs that we might not track, for example, supporting restaurants or stuff like that. So I would just like to see that there. And then as far as the initiatives go, the easiest one for me is the implementing the economic development strategic plan. These others are very granular, and so I'm happy to support what staff says on that. I guess my only question in terms of option 2, evaluating the feasibility of a culinary school at Columbia Mall, completely fine evaluating the culinary school. I'm even fine if it's at Columbia Mall, but wording the goal that specifically means that that's the only thing that staff evaluates. It could be that ABC Community College moves here and they already have a culinary program, but we've not explored those options. So from my perspective, I would love to see that broadened so that these are options that we're considering, but it's more the objective that we state explicitly, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I think I definitely agree with the changing the language for option 2. I think we all heard that we were interested in evaluating the culinary school option and seeing what that looks like, whether it's at Columbia Mall or the partnership in some other form. The third, implement, execute the economic development strategic plan. The economic development office, they have already taken the time to develop a plan, one that they are working towards, that they have goals set for. And so I would like to make sure that those things that we're looking at that as well, and that things that come out of goal number 2 aren't in conflict with that plan. Because they have already spent the money and invested a plan that their office has been working diligently to generate many successes, and we don't want to do something that may halt that effort. The first one, workforce symposium, that we're still on objective 2.1. The first initiative was organize a workforce symposium. That idea did come out of a retreat. It is very, very detailed of what it should be. I would, and I want to hear colleagues' feedback, but I would like to know, staff or Director Rubel, has there been any evaluation of this initiative? Is this something that is already included in the Economic Development Office strategic plan? Is there another route that we should take, or maybe best practice that relates to workforce development that still gets us what we want without necessarily doing a symposium? So I like the idea of the workforce concentration or the efforts behind it, but I want to make sure that that is the best tool to do that.
I don't know that Director Rubel is on. I can't see. I would just say we're just thinking about TIP Strategies plan. That was the group that did the plan for economic development. I don't recall a workforce symposium being listed in that. So in terms of whether or not that's the best mechanism, that's something that can certainly be evaluated. These are what we're doing right now gives us the ability to determine what we want to accomplish. But I don't recall there being anything like that that would be a driver for this particular initiative.
I'll just, again, to my previous point, it was very granular. And so I don't want to, if that's what staff thinks is best, then fine. I just want to make sure that that's how these things got here.
Have we shared goal 2 and the initiatives listed with the Economic Development Office? Have they reviewed this and provided any type of feedback?
So the answer to the question is the information was shared, but we don't have any specific feedback from economic development on these initiatives.
All right, moving forward, I guess, can we request staff looking at one the first one, the workforce symposium. They're going to follow economic development as well as a third option.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good. Moving on to objective 2.2, develop more shopping and amenity options. Looking at initiatives, partner with the Community Development Division to find and support growth opportunities throughout the county. Explore implementing retail recruitment programs designed and run by the county through Community Development Division partnerships. Implement annual schedule for review of SLBE and MBE list for accuracy. A biannual review and update business license fee schedule. Biannually review comprehensive plan and annually update land development code. And this is mainly Economic Development Office, the OSBO, and Richland County Conservation Commission. With the metrics of a new mixed-use development. All right, committee members, any thoughts on 2.2, any of the initiatives listed? Yes, Ms. Newton.
So this is, I guess, for me, the first time in the document, I felt like I broke my stride a little bit. I was like, yeah, I remember talking about that. I remember talking about that. And then I was like, I don't exactly remember it this way. I do remember that there was some sort of conversation about shopping and amenities. And I think I'm processing this a little bit more. What I feel like this is going towards, shopping is a specific example towards a conversation that we were having around quality of life and enjoyment and those types of things. So I guess I don't have a tremendous amount to offer here, except that this is something that I'm just going to have to spend some more time thinking with, because there are other things that also fall in that quality of life area that are not represented here. For example, recreation, which is an area where I think we have a great deal of untapped opportunity and potential that also greatly affects quality of life. And so nothing against shopping, and I could certainly deal with better shopping, but if this was put next to like some really great recreational opportunities, I might feel differently and my community might feel differently. So I guess I would just like to revisit that. Additionally, because again, this is so granular and it's just about retail and again, part of quality of life, but there's so many other things. As we look at this, I'll just say one, as we look at biannually reviewing the comprehensive plan and annually updating the land development code, bless our hearts, I think that that's an area that I would like to see fleshed out a little bit more in terms of what that means there. And also the planning department is not listed as an accountable party. And if those two items are here, it seems to me like they would want to be included as well. But, at the end of our process, to me, again, the metric, having a new mixed use development, it just doesn't seem to be addressing what I feel like my quality of life needs are. So I struggle with this one quite a bit.
Thank you. I will say I was in my group or a few of the roundtables I was in, this came up and some of this does look familiar. And it was focused more on shopping, retail, restaurants, not really more so amenities with recreation. The, I guess, idea that was thrown around in the group I was in at the retreat was working with community development to look at facade grant opportunities or developing some type of initiative where each district would identify maybe a strip mall in the area that needed a facelift so we could help, drive retail or shopping commercial business to that area, maybe adding some sidewalks, helping them with paint, those type of things. And then also looking at ways to help entrepreneurship with small business owners, maybe opening up restaurants and those type of things in areas. And that really more so what this was the community development and small business piece working together to find areas where we could bring new business. I know there's parts of our county where we talk about we have food deserts, and really that was more of what this was, that the shopping and kind of amenities, retail and food. So I do remember that part of the conversation. Now, if the objective is titled right, I'm not sure, but those things were thrown together. The piece that I guess I don't remember is the tying in of the comprehensive plan and the land development code to these things or to this objective. Mr. Livingston.
I think the big difference in that one was with economic development, the focus was primarily on looking at things from a business perspective, whereas Newton is focusing more from a service perspective, I think. And I think it's here because it was talking about how you create these opportunities for these businesses and so forth to generate revenue and things of that particular nature is why it's economic development.
And I guess that's helpful for me still. When you look at the world of economic development and helping business owners, if that world is like this, retail is like that. I mean, it's a very narrow part. And so I also am thinking a lot from a quality of life perspective. That's true. But I will say that I stand by my comment that recreation is an untapped resource in Richland County and a driver of economic development. And I think that there are a lot of things that we could do that would benefit entrepreneurship. It would benefit communities. It would benefit our health. So whether it goes here or someplace else, I would love for us to find a way where we could have a conversation about it. But this is so narrow that I don't even feel like it necessarily captures all the things, Ms. Mackey, that you just said. So
I would say with recreation, I agree. I would ask that you look at the other remaining goals, and not today, but at least by the next meeting, kind of give a recommendation of where, if you don't feel like recreation is addressed, where we need to include that. I do think the intent of goal 2 was for economic development. So I guess I would ask staff to kind of look at this review of the comprehensive plan and land development code and determine if this is the best fit to be tied to this objective. If we need to break some of these up and look at this in a different way, if this makes sense. I think we want to review it now. We don't want to put it on the shelf, forget about it. I just don't know if this is the right place. And then the metrics of a new mixed-use development, that does not seem to apply to any of the initiatives that were mentioned. Moving on to objective 2.3, promote and support a regional and state economic development team with initiatives of encourage private sector engagement with economic development, create an economic development marketing campaign for increased economic engagement, explore opportunities for additional collaboration with economic development and other government agencies.
Another one we definitely want to put Rich County Council under, and you can't do that without County Council.
And I guess our other question is for objective 2.3, is this already a part of economic development strategic plan? If it is, then I definitely want to make sure that we are getting their reports or however they're tracking it as well as we look at metrics.
Yes, ma'am. Because some of it is.
Okay.
So might be when I stepped out of the room or something. I felt like when we discussed this at the retreat, that we acknowledged that a regional economic development team already existed and that those structures already existed and that we were already participating within those structures. So I would like to take that, have staff take that back and affirm or correct my perception about this, but that regional structure already exists. And so from my perspective, I don't know that this should actually be a goal on its own. If we want to take some of these initiatives and put them in, our general economic development things, then that's fine. But as stated, the objective I mean, it already exists. We're already doing it. I don't know that we need it.
I think part of the conversation that came out, it does exist. We are doing it. I think a lot of the conversations that came from this was the promote piece. No one knows that we're doing it. How are we referring to ourselves when we're working with these regional and state folks? And I think it was a lot of education piece, but also how we're talking about ourselves, how we're marketing ourselves, and understanding those relationships when we do economic development. And so I don't know if this matches it, but it does happen. But the conversation was that many people don't understand where Richland County is when we work with these regional groups.
So I guess to me, the wording doesn't necessarily reflect that. And I guess I would, maybe I need to have a separate conversation. I would ask if that's really the issue or an issue, that people understand how we interact with some of our regional economic development organizations, or is the issue that we're not doing a good enough job promoting the economic opportunity at Richland County and what we have to offer? I just want the words and the goals to align, and I'm not sure if they do.
Any suggestions for staff on any changes you would have for said wording at all? All right, we have gotten through goal 2. I know everyone thought that we could just breeze through this, but we've gotten through goal 2. I think this was great conversation, good feedback. Any updates or I guess comments from staff about goal 1 and 2? No? Okay. So the intent would be the next committee meeting that we would get through the remaining goals as well. I would like at our next committee meeting, if we can have any updates made to goals 1 and 2 that we discussed today, as well as have an economic development office look at goal 2 and provide feedback. That would be great. All right. Oh, we are at item 6 on our agenda. That is adjournment. Have a motion and a second.
Mackey,
Move. Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you.